Members of the Security Council, I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Russian delegation convened today's urgent meeting of the Security Council having to do with the resumed punitive military operations with the use of terrorists from the pro-fascist right sector, as well as other national organizations, against their own people in the southeast of Ukraine by the government in Kiev. The subunit of the Ukrainian forces using tanks and other heavy artillery military helicopters, striking protesters and entrenching fighters. The first blood has already been let, and there's information about wounded and killed. If the criminal misadventures of the Kiev clique are not swiftly stopped, then the catastrophic context for Ukraine cannot be avoided. And we've many times warned of this. Punitive measures against its own people bear witness to the inability or the lack of desire of the current Kiev government to carry out its obligations under the Geneva Declaration from 17 April for a swift halt of all violence and the launching of broad national dialogue with the participation of all regions and political forces. If someone was doubting, well then now today, it's definitely clear that the many declarations of the so-called government of Ukraine regarding the intention to begin nationwide dialogue for finding a solution to the far-reaching crisis, we know that these declarations are nothing else than hypocrisy. The regime in Kiev, violating the agreement from 21 February, now is out and out violating the obligations from the Geneva Declaration of 17 April, which require, as a most urgent step, to halt all violence. In essence, at a time when Russia is taking efforts to de-escalate and settle the crisis, and recently, upon request of our Western partners and in interaction with the head of the OSCE, sent to Donetsk a representative of the President of Russia, the Russian Federation, for finding a solution to the issue of the held military specialists from a number of European countries. The Kiev regime, with the support of its Western sponsors, started a full-scale use of military force, effectively annihilating any hope in the Geneva Agreement being implemented. Of particular concern is information that during the punitive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces and illegal ultra-nationalist groups, there was English in the radio waves, as well as amongst those attacking in Slavyansk. English-speaking foreigners were noted. We would insist on the inadmissibility of any sort of outside interference in what's going on in Ukraine. It is time for Western colleagues to think twice, reason with those who they mentor in Ukraine, and stop toying with the destiny of the Ukrainian people to achieve their own geopolitical goals. How else would we interpret yet another example, blatant example of double standards used by the US? After Washington many times attempted to tell Russia where and how its military troops should rightly be deployed in its own territory, the White House now was insulted by our appeal to the Kiev government to withdraw forces from the east of Ukraine. I would recall that before, Washington has always requested from the legitimately elected President Yanukovych to not use force against its people, threatening everything. But now it's very strange logic. Now force can be used against civilians, but it needs to be used, and by a government that has no legitimacy. The High Representative of the EU didn't go much further than the American colleagues, philosophizing about the state's monopoly over the use of force. In the current context, this statement can really only be called provocational and incitatory. It seems that the High Representative did not only not participate in signing the Geneva Declaration, but didn't read it. In supporting those who perpetrated the coup d'etat in Kiev, in tamping out the protesters, the US and the EU bear great responsibility in effect destroying the path to a peaceful solution to the crisis. Against this backdrop, the categorical refusal of Washington looks totally non-fortuitous. That is, running counter to the Geneva Declaration of 17 April, the proposal being to support the continuation of dialogue between the Kiev government and the southeast of Ukraine under OSCE aegis. What could be a more striking example of the fact that the US has decided to bet on the use of force? We would call upon Kiev, as well as its enablers and the signers of the Geneva Declaration, that is the US and the EU, to not commit a fatal error, and to soberly take a look at all possible consequences of their actions. We would firmly call upon the West to stop the destructive policy with respect to Ukraine, and from those who self-proclaimed powers in Kiev to swiftly halt all punitive operations, to free political prisoners, ensure full freedom for journalists. This would be a genuine process of de-escalation. There's a need for a swift organization of authentic and equitable political dialogue with the participation of all regions, so as to draw up a mutually agreed upon agreement regarding the future of the country, rather than pretending to draw up reforms in a small circle of the self-proclaimed government of winners. Those who gave the criminal order to unleash bloodshed will bear full responsibility for what happens in the Ukraine. Thank you.